the file that I'm talking about with the autopilot is right here, and it's in XML format. So you can actually, like if we're working on the heading right here, it's a cascading controller, meaning control comes in on stage 1, and it looks at the input property, it looks at a reference property, and it tries to make, it takes the input property and it tries to, this is the input property, the amount of heading bug error there is, let me move this out of the way. This is the heading bug right here. And if I move this, let me actually pause. Let me move this out of the way so you can see it. So the heading right now is south. Okay. So it's S is south, so I'm going 180 degrees or south. And so the error, and if I click off this, it's going to go away, but the error is, the heading bug error is between, say, 220 and 180, so about 40 degrees. So what it does is the autopilot actually looks at that and says, okay, well, I want a reference to 0. I don't want that heading, I don't want there to be any error. Okay? When this property, heading hold, is set to true, and I do that in the nasal file, when that property is set to true, I want to look at this property here, get what that degree is, and I want to compare that to 0. This is an error, so there would be a delta, you know, there'd be the difference between 2. Wherever the heading bug is and the actual heading of the airplane, that's the delta, so 40 degrees. I want that to be 0, so what do I have to do that? That's the controller. So then I set a turn rate, okay? So then the turn rate then feeds into cascading stage number 2, which is also active when heading hold is set to true. So you look at the turn rate, now that's a reference. So it's looking at my amount of, it's taking and looking at the roll of the airplane, how many degrees it's rolled, and it's looking at what it should be rolled, and then it uses the ailerons to do what it needs to do. So one stage does its thing, generates an output. That output is referenced in the next stage, which then generates the action. So it's a cascading controller, just like in the paper mill, they'd use it for pneumatic controls. It's a PID controller, okay, proportional integrator derivative. You don't have to know calculus, you just have to understand a little bit about it. So you can tweak any of these values right here in the config section, and it will change it all. I mean, for example, let's check this one, and let's say that this is, it's 0.05, let's have fun. Let's make it 0.5, so it's a factor of 10. So when there's an asterisk here, in this editor, the file is stale, so I save it. Now I go up here and I go debug, reload autopilot. So now it's active. I just reloaded the autopilot on the fly. Now watch what happens. It might crash and it might not, okay? Because sometimes it like does a barrel roll with me, so I can't promise you. It is trial and error, all right? Okay. So it's reacting to that, okay? Now watch what happens when I go heading. So heading hold right now. Roll X's. Heading hold is false right now. Heading hold is off. You can see right here, heading hold is set to false. And those autopilot controllers were only active when it was true. So I'm going to set it, I'm going to execute this function, and it's going to go to true, and look what's happening to the airplane. It's went all haywire. So that's how you tune the autopilot. You're like, oh, no, that won't work. So then you hit pause, and then you go back here, and you go, that is stupid. And you come down here. And you set it at 0 again, and you say save. And it might have taken me 3 days to come up with the right settings for this one controller. And there's a cool way to do it visually that I can't do it because it would take too long, but I can show you. So now I go and I reload the autopilot again. And heading hold is set to true. Let me turn that to false. So I'm going to have the airplane here in a second. So I'm just going to manually fly the airplane a second. And sometimes you kind of have to let the system flush itself out, so to speak. And so we'll turn the heading mod on. And so we're sort of back to normal behavior. So it's really cool. Well, here it says debug false. If I set debug to true and started flight gear, it's going to spit out all kinds of information to the console. Somebody has written a really cool Perl script that shoots out just the information that deal with these configurations in 6 columns. And that information is right here. So it's a flat file, okay? It's not even comma separated, it's just space separated. All right? So what you can do with that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it's like the input value, the reference, the PID, and the output, okay? What you can do with that is you can write it to a file using the Perl script, and then you can point KST at that file. And so in real time, KST reloads or upgrades, okay? It's happening in real time. So if you had to sit there and, if you had to sit there and tweak all those parameters, and then restart the autopilot, like if you were right here. If you had to go through here and say, oh, 0.5 didn't work, let's try 0.1. Oh, that's a little better, let's try 0.15. And restart it every time, you'd go crazy. You want to be able to do it very quickly. And so what the cool part about it is that you get yourself, I got a 23-inch monitor, you get yourself all configured, set all these different things up, and you're flying, and the autopilot's flying, and you tweak things, and then you get the KST set up, and you watch what's happening here. You can actually see what the waveform looks like when you make changes. So depending upon which one of these properties you looked at, now this is really blown up much bigger than it should be. You probably have it right about there. You can see here that when I made it turn, I mean look at, when I made it, it might even be, okay, I got a really sharp spike here, whatever this property was, and I just made this, I didn't even label the axes, but I just made this today for a demonstration. I got a really big spike here, you know. I didn't look at how big that spike is. Something's going on there, and I need to figure out what it is. So I adjust it just like adjusting a machine. It's the same kind of industrial control that's done in proprietary software for a paper machine, for example. And they just, no matter what they're doing, maybe there's a pneumatic apparatus that drives the spray nozzles that spray the pulp onto the screen at the head of the paper machine. Maybe they're not spraying it right and you're getting a tear all the time. So the engineer comes and plugs in and he actually adjusts the controllers just like I adjust the controllers in this configuration file. He comes and he adjusts his controllers and he watches an oscilloscope or he watches an output just like I'm watching an output right here. So it's just real-time monitoring of the parameter changes that he does, that he inputs, seeing the output. And it saves so much time. But it takes about 15 or 20 minutes to get everything set up, and I need bigger real estate, so it's hard to do, so I didn't do it. But it's really cool, and I mean, until a month and a half ago, I didn't know how to do this, you know. So it's really amazing what you can learn when you have to. But like I put in one of the posts the other day, the biggest problem with anything is that you don't know what you don't know. Once you do know what you don't know, you just go learn it. That's the easy part. Finding out what you don't know, that's the hard part.
Very interesting.